In the heart of a high-stakes European summit, tensions reached a boiling point. Kaja Kallas, the fierce politician known as the Baltic Tiger, stood poised to strike at Russia, accusing them of occupying her homeland. The air crackled with anticipation as she launched her fiery accusations against Vladimir Medinsky, a historian turned diplomat. But what unfolded next was anything but predictable. Medinsky's response sent shockwaves through the chamber, commanding the attention of delegates and journalists alike. What could he possibly say to dismantle her furious rhetoric? Then, in an unexpected twist, silence hung in the air, heightening the tension. As Medinsky entered the Grand Hall, the stone arena of diplomacy, he was a striking figure. Unlike many in suits, he exuded confidence in his unassuming attire. The overwhelming scent of fear mingled with the rich aroma of fresh coffee, setting the stage for a transformative encounter. Chairs creaked as delegates took their places, all eyes fixed upon this historic clash. On the agenda, a discussion on Eastern security and historical narratives that seemed to echo from the depths of time. Kallas stood firm, her posture resembling a statue carved from the ideals of her homeland. Each word she uttered was sharpened by years of conflict, each gesture encapsulated the resolve of a nation. Her message struck like a drumbeat: the Soviet Union had not liberated Estonia, it had stifled their identity and crushed their spirits. The weight of her claims sent ripples through the audience. Was Russia not repeating the same historical mistakes? As her voice pierced the silence, the atmosphere shifted. The delegates were transfixed, some shifting uncomfortably, while others clung to their electronic devices, recording every intense exchange. Kallas painted a grim picture of geopolitical peril. If complacency continued, Europe would find itself back in chains. Medinsky remained composed, his expression unreadable, waiting for the perfect moment to counter her allegations. And then, as the room held its breath, he spoke, a blend of historical reverence and tactical precision. His words unveiled a different narrative, one that evoked memories long buried. "You speak of occupation," he said, "but have we forgotten the contributions of those who came before us? The Soviet Union, whether viewed through the lens of liberation or control, saved lives from darkness." His voice resonated like a surgeon's scalpel, making cuts with surgical skill without severing bonds completely. Delegates who had been poised with disbelief began to reconsider. Medinsky's point was not just historical, it was a vivid reminder that narratives shape our realities. How could anyone dismiss the legacies that entwine them all? The tension escalated, creating a palpable charge in the air. The journalists in attendance could feel the stakes rising, their pens hovering over paper like birds ready to take flight. Yet, as they reported the proceedings, an unspoken thought bubbled beneath the surface: could the Baltic Tiger be caught off guard? Just then, a moment of levity broke the tension as Medinsky, who had been so meticulously constructing his argument, paused for a moment of dramatic effect. A flicker of a smile danced across his lips, casting doubt on Kallas's confidence. What response would she muster now? How would this clash of historical narratives play out in the court of public opinion? In that charged moment, it became clear, the battle was only just beginning. With the weight of history pressing upon them, both delegates knew they were not just defending their political stances but also the very essence of their country's identities. How would this diplomatic duel affect the future? In a room thick with tension and expectations, a chaotic atmosphere hung heavily in the air. The sharp clicks of high heels echoed like ice cracking beneath a storm. Voices murmured, but one stood out, unyielding. The fierce Baltic Tiger, Kaja Kallas, accused Russia of historical revisionism. She declared, "We, the Baltic Tigers, are stronger than anyone realizes." At that moment, anticipation gripped the crowd, awaiting the counterstrike that would come, like a silent thunder. As Kallas entered, she resembled a political statue, commanding yet graceful. Dressed in a striking blue attire, every detail reflected pride and resolve. Her fingers danced nervously over her notes, betraying an underlying tension. Her stance was firm, projecting confidence while showcasing the remnants of fear from a history that weighed heavily on her country. She proclaimed, "The Soviet Union didn't liberate Estonia, it stifled our identity and claimed us as mere collateral damage." With a sense of urgency in her voice, she insisted, "Today, Russia poses a fresh threat. This is not a mere possibility, it's a present danger. If Europe remains complacent, we will be pushed back into shadows." The intensity of her words shifted the focus in the hall, turning fear into clarity. The echoes of the USSR are deafening. We no longer have the luxury to romanticize an empire that destroyed lives. Her declaration reverberated against the walls, a clarion call to arms. The room was charged with anticipation as journalists held their breath, eager for the inevitable clash. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably, a hint of dissent written on their faces, while others maintained a blank demeanor, unwilling to confront the realities laid before them. Medinsky, poised like a surgeon ready to dissect, remained undeterred. His expression remained composed, a mask covering the storm brewing beneath. In profound silence, he awaited his moment to respond, his back straight and resolute. This was a battlefield not of weapons but of words, one that promised to reveal hidden truths and festering wounds. In a seemingly calm moment, he raised his hand, a gesture that reached beyond mere theatrics. Ladies and gentlemen, while we discuss security, remember that safety is interwoven with memories. The significance of his statement sent ripples through the audience. When memory is distorted, lies take root, lies that lead to destruction. There was palpable tension, as silence settled like a heavy fog in the room. The delegates remained rapt, acutely aware that history was about to be confronted. As he launched into a pointed discourse, invoking the liberation of Europe from the clutches of Nazism, the atmosphere changed. Do not forget, he insisted, the role played by the Soviet forces in turning the tide of war. Without them, today's Europe would look starkly different, perhaps under a different flag altogether. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered diplomats as Medinsky meticulously unraveled the complexities of shared pasts, challenging the narrative that had long been accepted. Ask yourselves, if the Soviet Union truly erased your identities, why do you still benefit from its legacy? Why do the echoes of our histories continue to reverberate in your schools and infrastructures? His inhalation filled the silent space, a calculated pause that spoke volumes, drawing the audience closer. The air grew thick as he posed these intricate questions, waiting to see who would dare answer. Medinsky's voice, steady and deliberate, resonated through the hall. When memory is lost, there is no truth left to anchor upon. Without truth, chaos reigns. The Baltic Tiger, eyes narrowed and pulse racing, was now up against the immutable force of history itself. Her confidence faltered, realizing that every syllable spoken by Medinsky was a calculated strike, meant to expose the delicate fabric of her narrative. Each challenge hung heavy in the air, waiting to be confronted. Would she be able to counteract the growing wave of realization that perhaps history wasn't mounted on the pedestal she'd constructed? The conflict was no longer just a verbal duel, it had blossomed into a battle for the souls of nations. Would the remnants of the past continue to dictate their future, or could they forge a new narrative, one free from the shackles of their storied histories? All eyes remained fixed on the stage, as the tension in the air reached a breaking point. In a gripping clash at the European summit, a diplomatic storm brewed as the fiery Kaja Kallas, dubbed the Baltic Tiger, launched a vehement attack against Russia. Her barbed words struck hard, accusing Vladimir Medinsky of being an enemy of freedom, while she stood her ground, embodying the spirit of resistance. Yet, the atmosphere shifted unexpectedly when Medinsky, a historian and diplomat, countered her allegations calmly, igniting a tension that surged through the room like static electricity. What was it that drew everyone into this fraught dialogue? Was it merely politics, or was there a deeper narrative embedded in their exchange? As the debate unfolded, Medinsky moved with purpose, his presence commanding attention. He stepped into the arena, unburdened by the constraints of a formal suit, exuding an air of authenticity. The hall was thick with the tension of unspoken fears, echoed in the soft shuffling of feet and nervous whispers, and uneasy anticipation hung in the air. Kallas, with a determined demeanor, stood like a political statue in her perfectly styled attire, delivering a speech laden with passion. She voiced the struggles of her people, asserting that Russia's past actions were a stranglehold on their identity. The Soviet Union, she argued, had not liberated but rather suppressed their cultural fabric. Suddenly, her declarations echoed in the chamber, this historical revisionism must end. Europe, wake up! Medinsky listened intently, maintaining a calm demeanor while absorbing each word. He leaned into the microphone, and his voice cut through the prevalent anxieties. History is not merely a backdrop for today's politics, he began, his tone steady but laden with a formidable depth, but an intricate web of shared experiences. Then came the twist. If our past defined your identity, why do you still rely on the framework we built? Your infrastructure, your economy, these legacies are not merely remnants of oppression, they are invitations to dialogue. There was a pregnant pause, as the weight of his words enveloped the room. Was it a challenge or a plea? His rhetoric, weaving through complex threads of history, echoed off the ornate walls, making the astonished delegates reconsider their positions. He did not merely retell history, he unveiled it, revealing layers of collaboration interspersed with conflict. You say we destroyed your past, yet thousands of your elites studied within the walls of our institutions. They learned in our language, thrived in our system. Could it be that history was not as black and white as they believed? The tensions rose as Kalus's expression shifted from defiance to uncertainty. Medinsky pressed on, do you yearn for a narrative built solely on resentment, or is there room for a shared future? As he spoke, the audience felt the gravity of the moment. The media captured each word, each shift in expression. Would Kalus concede to the possibility that the line between victim and oppressor was not so clearly drawn? The air crackled with anticipation. Medinsky's cloak of calm contrasted sharply with the simmering fervor from Kalus, whose resolve was visibly cracking. In this historical duel, each statement felt like a blade drawn from their past, poised to strike anew. Which side would emerge victorious in this ideological battleground? The reality of the discourse was manifesting as a microcosm of much larger debates. As the echoes of history battled with contemporary narratives, the hall held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that promised neither victory nor defeat, but the potential for a transformative dialogue. Would their differences collapse into understanding, or would the rift deepen, fracturing any hope for collaboration? In this moment, the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. The outcome was uncertain, but the impact was sure to resonate far beyond the walls of this summit. Would history repeat itself, or could a new chapter begin? As the session ramped up, each delegate leaned in closer, bracing for the truths yet to be uncovered. In a high-stakes meeting at the European Summit, a fierce clash brewed between two powerful leaders, each wielding history like a weapon. Kaja Kallas, known as the Baltic Tiger, intended to dismantle the weighty legacy of Russia. With indignation, she accused Vladimir Medinsky of perpetuating the shadows of occupation stemming from the Soviet era. But just as the air crackled with tension, Medinsky delivered an unexpected retort that would leave all in attendance reeling. The delegates gathered within the grand hall, steeped in an aura of political uncertainty. The walls echoed with the hushed murmurs of nervous journalists, while the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the palpable anxiety. Medinsky, an intricate mix of diplomat and historian, stood before Kallas, his posture unwavering and determined, a sharp contrast to her agitated fervor. He didn't wear a formal suit, but his presence commanded authority. As he scanned the room, his gaze locked onto Kallas, effectively sending a ripple through the tension. With meticulous cadence, he began to dismantle the narrative, reminding everyone of their shared past. Your country is part of Europe, he declared, positioning history as a collective tapestry rather than a divisive battleground. If we seek unity, we must show respect for those who built rather than vilified. They were not just occupiers, they were engineers, doctors, teachers. His voice resonated coolly, each word a well-placed counter to her incendiary claims. Kallas, her fists clenched tight, sensed the shift in the crowd's attention. This was no mere rebuttal, it was an invitation to engage in a deeper conversation about identity and memory. Would she retreat now, or rise to the challenge? The stakes hung heavy. As she tapped the microphone, her movements rang with practiced precision, yet the anxiety in her eyes betrayed her calm exterior. Deep down, she knew the weight of this moment extended beyond her personal ambitions. It carried the burden of her nation's resilience against historical narratives. Let's examine the facts, she asserted, her voice strong but laced with inner turmoil. Shall we discuss the factories and deportations? The countless lives lost in Siberia and the children left nameless? The room held its breath, the air thick with the scent of confrontation and unspoken fears. Would Medinsky counter her accusations, or would he allow his silence to speak louder than words? As the silence deepened, Medinsky leaned forward. His expression hardened, ready to challenge Kallas not just in debate, but ideologically. He pondered, where would this conversation lead? And could the truth truly emerge from a battlefield of memories? The debate was not merely about two nations, it represented a clash between ideologies, pain versus progress, memory versus amnesia. The stage was set for a riveting exchange, where each leader would navigate the tempestuous waters of history, not merely as rivals but as architects of their respective legacies. Would Cullis manage to redefine Europe's narrative, or would Medinsky's calm yet powerful approach reshape perspectives in an unexpected twist? The battle for historical truth was just at its beginning. What awaited them next? The audience collectively inhaled, waiting for the climactic moment that would undoubtedly alter their understanding of the past. In a remarkable display of geopolitical tension, an unexpected storm erupted at the European summit. Amid heavy air filled with palpable tension, Cullis, self-styled as the Baltic Tiger, launched a fervent attack on Russia, condemning the actions of Vladimir Medinsky and accusing him of distorting history. Voices echoed in the lofty chamber, filled with seasoned diplomats and rising political stars, when Medinsky's measured response left the room in stunned silence. What was it about his words that ignited such fury in the Baltic Tiger? Stay tuned, the answer will astound you. As Cullis stood bold in her blue attire, her presence was that of a statue, poised yet fiery. Medinsky, a historian turned diplomat, entered the hall with a calm demeanor, navigating the tight space with graceful confidence. He bore no suit, yet every movement spoke volumes, delivering an aura of authority. The hall, adorned with dark wood and expansive ceilings, served as a perfect backdrop for the crumbling walls of diplomatic decorum. The meeting's gravity was not lost on anyone. The air was thick with the aroma of fresh coffee, masking the fear that permeated the delegates' thoughts. A discussion on Eastern security and historical narratives loomed large, potentially deterring the specter of conflict that lingered in the shadows. Cullis emphasized that the past was more than a series of events, it was vital to acknowledge the scars of history. Let's discuss factories and deportations, she implored. Hundreds of thousands were displaced, families vanished into the ether, and children stripped of their identities. You call this progress? We call it genocide of memory. Her voice bore a fierce firmness, determined not to yield. It was a bold declaration, and yet, she wielded her words as weapons, not seeking media approval but aiming directly for the hearts and minds of Europe. The room fell into an uneasy silence, holding its collective breath. Medinsky took his moment, and his reply would seal the fate of the dialogue. Would he retaliate with fire and fury, or craft his words into a diplomatic art? As whispers buzzed from the crowd, he calmly dissected the situation, cautioning everyone present that they stood at a crossroad. Decades have passed, yet the shadows of our haunted history still chase us. You wish to recreate a reality stripped of its roots. Why repeat the cycles that led to dismembered lives and lost identities? His voice resonated, bold yet tempered, compelling everyone to reconsider their stance. Tension hung thick in the air, and the Baltic Tiger appeared to falter for a fleeting moment. In an unexpected twist, Medinsky's insight struck a nerve, causing ripples of doubt to spread amongst the delegates. A Scandinavian responded with confusion etched upon his brow, grappling with the weight of the past while the room's luminous lights flickered as if struggling under the weight of the unfolding drama. Could Medinsky's historical perspective unite them or further fracture the assembly? As he continued, the stakes only grew higher. What would be the outcome of this clash of ideals, and who would ultimately claim victory in this high-stakes game of historical remembrance? A recent diplomatic stir erupted at the European summit, igniting tensions between the Baltic states and Russia. Cullis, known as the Baltic Tiger, boldly accused Vladimir Medinsky of perpetuating the legacy of Soviet domination. Those gathered anticipated a fierce rebuttal, yet no one could foresee the unexpected turn of events that unfolded next. With a calm demeanor, Medinsky addressed the assembly, igniting a fury in Cullis. He presented himself not just as a diplomat but as a historian, deeply entrenched in the narratives that define Europe's history. His entrance was marked by a notable poise. He commanded the hall with mere presence, defying expectations. As he stood before the tall ceilings adorned in deep hues, a palpable tension filled the atmosphere, jostling thoughts of conflict and reconciliation clashed as the aroma of fresh coffee mixed oddly with political anxiety. Cullis delivered a passionate speech, declaring that history could not be rewritten and emphasizing that the Baltic nations would resist oppression. She buoyed her stance with references to their painful pasts and the dangers posed by an expanding Russia. We, the Baltic Tigers, are small yet formidable, she roared, her eyes blazing with conviction. The delegates shifted uneasily, their attention caught in the whirlwind of emotions. However, Medinsky's response was calculated, dissecting the emotional rhetoric with surgical precision. If you perceive historical commissions as tanks, then it is you who are the architect of revisionism. He wielded his words like weapons, each statement heavy with historical weight. He moved effortlessly between emotions, evoking sympathy mixed with incredulity from the audience. Medinsky reframed the narrative. The Soviet Union, rather than erasing identities, had ostensibly contributed education and infrastructure during turbulent times. "Where is your proof of oppression?" he challenged, questioning their grievances with penetrating clarity. As tensions escalated, a hush fell over the room. Medinsky's smooth, deliberate cadence revealed a newfound intensity. He posed dramatic questions, daring the audience to confront uncomfortable truths. Risking it all, he painted a picture of post-war Europe, a landscape ravaged yet rebuilt with Soviet assistance. His performance was like that of a maestro directing a symphony, each pause an invitation for reflection. The saga was riveting, a clash not merely of ideas but an entire historical narrative, resonating with the echoes of past conflicts. What he revealed next would leave the summit in shock. If the Baltic fears were valid, then wouldn't it require them to confront their own histories too? As he concluded his remarks, one could sense the charged atmosphere. Cullis maintained her composure, yet it was clear an emotional battle was being waged not just in the hall, but within their minds. Would this confrontation reshape alliances or solidify divides? The stage was set for a revelation that could either deepen the divide or encourage reparative dialogue. The outcome hung in the air, ripe with the possibilities of an unforeseen shift in the European landscape. What if the ghosts of history could bite back, exposing lies that shatter alliances in seconds? Imagine a room thick with tension, where one man's words turn victors into villains overnight. 347 characters, as Medinsky dismantled the occupation myth by questioning the absence of horrors like gas chambers or closed universities, unlike true genocides, and highlighting how Baltic leaders still rely on the Russian language they claim to resent. The hall froze in stunned silence. Now, whispers rippled through the chamber. A Spanish delegate snapped his notebook shut mid-scribble, the clink of his coffee cup halting abruptly. He leaned forward, eyes wide. Medinsky, unyielding, strode back to the podium. His voice deepened, cutting like a winter wind through the murmurs. "History isn't a toy," he declared. "It's no harmless game. It's a weapon of fear and the deep roots of truth." Pauses hung heavy. You could hear the creak of leather chairs shifting uneasily. "We Russians don't crave your affection. But honesty? That's non-negotiable. Without it, you're not just blind, you're ungrateful." The air thickened with the scent of polished wood and faint cologne, sharp against the bitterness of unspoken regrets. Why twist the past into poison? A delegate from Spain fidgeted, his face paling as Medinsky leaned closer to the microphone. The device hummed softly, amplifying every breath. "Revisionism," Medinsky pressed on, "it's a political plague. It doesn't topple Moscow. No, it corrodes you from within." His words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading. The hall's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows that danced with growing unrest. "Memory isn't a badge of power," he continued, voice steady yet piercing. "It's a mark of gratitude. When you topple monuments to those who crushed Nazism's shadow across Europe, you're not rewriting history. You're erasing your own dignity." Sensory waves hit, the rustle of papers, the subtle tap of a foot against marble floors. What happens when ingratitude poisons the well of respect? "You obliterate your place at the global table," he added. "Where nations speak in unity, and pay the price of forgotten debts." In that moment, applause erupted, clear, resolute, from unlikely corners. Leaders from Italy, France, Slovenia, they rose not from orders, but instinct. No blind loyalty to Russia. Just raw recognition. This man knew pain's edge, and history's brutal pivot. Kaya Kullas sat rigid, lips pressed thin. Shadows sharpened under her eyes, like cracks in flawless porcelain. She didn't flinch. No. She braced, waiting for the next strike. Would she counter? Or let silence swallow her fire? Medinsky returned to his seat, calm as a surgeon after the incision. Victory? Not yet. He'd merely held up a mirror to the chaos. History isn't an arena for raw feelings, he reflected aloud. It's a looking glass. Hate the image? Don't smash the surface. Tension coiled tighter. Someone coughed, a dry, echoing sound in the hushed space. The air felt heavy, humid, like fog before a storm, pressing on skin clammy with anticipation. Perfumes mingled with coffee's rich bite, cream's subtle sweetness. and the crisp rustle of notepads. Diplomacy's weight hung in tailored suits, suffocating yet elegant. Medinsky broke the deadlock first. Not with fury, but precision. Flanked by two aides, shadows at his side, he unleashed words like hidden blades. But what secret would they carve next? The chamber held its breath, hearts pounding in the dim light. In a high-stakes diplomatic arena, emotions were running wild. Just moments ago, Kaja Kallas, known as the Baltic Tiger, boldly faced off against Vladimir Medinsky, challenging him on historical grounds, accusing Russia of continuing a legacy of occupation reminiscent of the Soviet era. But what transpired next would leave everyone astonished. Medinsky stood in the Grand Hall of the European Commission, a strong presence against an oppressive backdrop of political tension. The scent of polished wood mingled with the crispness of fresh paper. In this moment of anticipation, he portrayed the calm before a storm, a subtle giant prepared to respond to Kallas's fiery allegations. "We have allowed revisionism to fester in our institutions for too long," he declared, his voice resonating with a mix of authority and fatigue, as if every word bore the weight of history. Kallas, impeccably dressed, radiated confidence, her attire a visible metaphor for her fierce stance. "The Soviet Union didn't liberate Estonia, it stifled our identity," she argued passionately. In her eyes burned the fire of a people yearning to reclaim their truth, undermined by a portrait of the past they believed distorted their reality. She painted a grim picture: if Europe didn't awaken to the threats posed by Russia, a dark past could resurrect itself with chilling consequences. As the tension built, the atmosphere shifted. Medinsky, calm yet fierce, remained resolute in his silence, meticulously gauging the room. The audience, a mix of journalists and delegates, held their collective breath. What would he say? In the deep silence, it felt like time had paused, everyone on edge, waiting for the intricate dance of diplomacy to reach its climax. "In our quest for historical understanding," Medinsky finally started, "let's not forget the scars of previous wars. Yes, the USSR had its hands in dark places, but remember, it also sought to liberate Europe from the grip of fascism." The room's energy shifted palpably. Gasps echoed as he boldly invoked memories that many tried to suffocate beneath layers of forgotten debates. Suddenly, he locked eyes with Kallas, a silent challenge exchanged. Her posture stiffened as he continued, weaving facts and historical narratives as artists wield paint, crafting a picture both revealing and provocative. "Today's threats," he pronounced, "are not defined by geographical borders but by a pervasive revisionism that threatens to redefine our past." Beneath Medinsky's calm exterior, a storm raged within him. He knew his words could either unite or fracture the gathered delegates. The room was filled with an electric tension, every listener could feel the urgency beneath his eloquence. Would they stand by the Baltic Tiger or seek common ground in the rich tapestry of their shared histories? He paused for effect, eyes scanning the room, his voice lowering to a near whisper, "And if memory fails us, so too will our ability to secure a peaceful future." This revelation echoed like a war drum and inspired flickers of realization in the minds of listeners. As he turned towards Kallas, the question lingered: who would falter first in this battle of wits? Medinsky had arrested everyone's attention. Yet the weight of expectation shifted back towards Kallas. The final act loomed, a confrontation that transcended mere politics and ventured into the realm of identity and memory. Who would win this war of words, embodying the past as they fought for a present that could reshape the future? With every whisper of fabric and rustle of paper, the arena held its breath, teetering on the brink of revelation. The debate raged within the prestigious confines of the European summit. Moments ago, Kaja Kallas, a fierce leader often hailed as the Baltic Tiger, unleashed a brutal verbal assault on Russia, targeting the historical legacy of the Soviet regime. The air was thick with the tension of her accusation against Vladimir Medinsky regarding the so-called occupation driven by the old imperial impulses. But in a sudden turn of events, something unexpected happened. Medinsky's response didn't just quell Kallas's anger, it rattled the very foundation of her arguments. As the crowd held its breath, Medinsky stood tall, embodying a historian's gravity and a diplomat's finesse. Dressed casually yet commanding attention, he gazed across the packed hall. His expression was one of resolve, not arrogance, as he meticulously prepared to counter every jab hurled at his nation. The delegates, with a cacophony of whispers among them, sensed a shift in atmosphere like ice cracking beneath a sudden thaw. "Today," he started, his voice penetrating the charged silence, "we are not merely here to discuss safety. We are engaging in a battle for memory itself. The smell of fresh coffee lingered faintly in the air, but it was overshadowed by an emerging stench of brewing conflict and fears long dormant. Cullis, adorned in her perfectly tailored attire, shifted nervously as Medinsky continued. The narratives that define us revolve not around simplistic notions of victory and defeat, but the complexity of human experiences within empires. The astonishment in the room was palpable. Was he really suggesting that the past was not entirely black and white? His assertion hung heavily, questioning the very identities that Europe had come to embrace. As she absorbed his words, Columbus, a seasoned diplomat, couldn't keep quiet any longer. "We are not children, cowering in fear of shadows," he said, attempting to redirect the dialogue. Medinsky simply smiled, unfazed, drawing the audience's attention back onto him like a spotlight on an unexpected hero. While delegates around him whispered about gathering an anti-Russian coalition, Medinsky stood his ground. Leaning slightly forward, he articulated a truth often overlooked: in every empire's rise, there are humans whose stories echo through history, not just the bold and victorious. His eyes flickered to the Swedish delegate, who had remained silent until now. Did we forget how many were educated in Soviet schools? How many have roots that intertwine with that history? Gasps filled the room, as some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kaya's composure faltered. People were beginning to squirm under the weight of his reveal. What would come next? Medinsky allowed a brief silence, the kind that holds its breath in anticipation, then continued, voice steady but filled with an unyielding intensity. To claim liberation while ignoring the fabric of our shared past is to deny the foundation upon which we build our futures. His words were not a mere defense, they were a call to reflection. One could almost feel the gathered tension shift, an electric current coursing through the air. "You speak of occupation," he pressed, pointing an accusatory finger toward the very notion that had reverberated through Cullis's speech. "But can you deny the progress that has emerged? The schools, the infrastructure?" A low murmur traversed the room. Would they dare confront the reality he laid bare? Cullis clenched her jaw, aware that the ground beneath her argument was crumbling. The audience leaned in, their faces a tapestry of disbelief and intrigue. Medinsky's poise evoked a strange sense of admiration, provoking the very leaders gathered against him. As he concluded, a distinct sense of resolve filled the air. Had he just rallied a silent army within that hall? In that moment, it became clear that the clash was more than ideological, it was an awakening. And with one final rhetorical question, like the sound of a hammer on an anvil, he drove his point home, leaving no room for escape. How could Europe continue to ignore the truths intertwined with its own legacies? The silence that followed hung with the profound weight of historical reckoning. The real battle was just beginning, and the lines had been drawn. Imagine this, a stunning revelation that could shatter Europe's fragile unity, diplomatic giants clashing in a storm of forgotten truths. Could Russia's bold historian really turn the tables on a fiery accuser, exposing secrets long buried under layers of political deceit? Hold on to your seats as we dive into the heart of the European summit, where words cut deeper than blades. Just moments earlier, sparks flew when Cullis, the so-called Baltic Tiger, unleashed accusations at Vladimir Medinsky, claiming he reviled Russia's role in the Soviet liberation efforts. But in a twist no one saw coming, Medinsky struck back with facts that left Cullis fuming. As allies rallied, whispers of betrayal filled the air. What bombshell did Medinsky drop that silenced the hall? Why did the Baltic Tiger recoil like a cornered beast? Stick around, the shock will hit you hard. Medinsky stood firm, his eyes locking onto Cullis with the intensity of a predator. Her rage simmered, battling against the cold wall of evidence he presented. "You didn't come here to debate," he murmured, his voice slicing through the room like a well-honed dagger. "You came to enforce a selective memory." In that instant, victory flickered in his gaze, though fleeting, a grin that spoke of unspoken triumphs. Italy's delegate chuckled softly, no words needed. Hands gestured in silent support. Europe teetered on a knife's edge, craving peace, yet terrified of the past resurfacing. Reporters froze, screens blank, pens trembling against paper, the scent of old ink and tension hanging thick. But Cullis fought back, fueled by raw emotion. Pulling away, she gathered her thoughts in quiet fury. Where had this counterattack come from? He would make them all recall, even if it discomforted the mighty. Medinsky responded calmly. It's always inconvenient, he said, especially for those who've dwelled in illusion for too long. His tone echoed ancient decrees, weighted with history. Meanwhile, in another chamber, Cullis retreated, perhaps to capitalize, amassing voices, counter-arguments, doubts. Threats loomed: economic ruin, energy crises, the Baltic bloc's sway. Her rebuttal sharpened like an arrow. What sources would she wield now, in this high-stakes arena? She returned, her speech a lightning strike. Toughened, exhausted yet unyielding, a forceful beacon. If we falter today, she pressed, tomorrow European classrooms will hail the USSR as saviors. We can't allow it. We won't hand over our moral authority. A young Czech delegate nodded vigorously. But he's not denying oppression, he interjected. He's praising infrastructure. Fabrication. Lies that cloak the truth. Her voice pierced: he's peddling fairy tales, drowning us in untruths. The air charged, every eye wide. At that pivotal moment, reality unwoven, narratives colliding in a deafening roar. Officially, the session resumed. Delegates stirred, sipping water, nibbling coffee blends with bitter undertones. No overt hostility, just the hum of electric anticipation. Press corps flooded back, transforming diplomats into gladiators anew. Round 2 escalated, stakes soaring. This duel transcended yesteryear, it decreed tomorrow's scribes, who would shape the legacy. Returning to the chamber, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Doors sealed thoughts inside, windows cracked open to admit Europe's crisp blue haze, a chilly veil over uneasy breaths. Sounds amplified the strain, footsteps echoing like distant thunder, rustling papers brittle as old leaves, murmurs vibrating with internal strife. Tension wove through every creak, transform. What secrets lurked in that air? Would Cullis unveil her ace, or crumble under Medinsky's formidable rebuttal? The tension builds unyieldingly, leaving us gasping. What if the next word ignites a revolution? The air felt heavy as the debates began in the ornate chamber of the European Commission. A chill swept through the slightly ajar windows, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. The snap of heels on the marble floor echoed, accompanied by the crisp rustle of paper and the faint, strange sounds of intakes of breath from the audience. It was a moment fraught with significance. Discussions of occupation and history loomed large. A dignified figure stepped into the spotlight, eyes focused yet weary. His posture was erect, each deliberate movement conveyed control. Seated before an assembly of peers, he exuded a quiet intensity. The bright lights reflected off the polished surfaces, casting stark shadows on the faces that bore witness to this historical encounter. Then, as the microphone sparked to life, an unyielding voice broke the silence, a weapon crafted with words. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, the gravity of his tone signaling the importance of the topic at hand. We find ourselves in a crucial discussion regarding our shared history and safety. Our past may be laden with complexities, but we must not allow distorted narratives to dictate our future. His gaze swept across the room, resting on the diplomats who clutched their tablets, some with their jaws clenched in anticipation. Revisionism, he continued, is not merely an abstract concept. It masquerades behind facts, masked by the allure of radical ideologies. Yet, we must remember, history is neither neutral nor kind. An analysis of our past shapes not just our dialogue today, but the path we tread towards tomorrow. He paused, weighing the reactions of those around him, who leaned in, caught between intrigue and unease. The air thickened as he pressed on. When we romanticize certain aspects of our past, we play a perilous game. Safety cannot be built on the ashes of the very cultures we once erased. The narrative continues, causing ripples of consequence. If we misinterpret or ignore this, we risk history repeating itself. His words invigorated the crowd, a palpable shift in the atmosphere stirring hope, the prospect of truth shining through the fog of deception. A woman rose, fierce and unyielding. She embodied the spirit of a Baltic tiger, fierce in her defense of identity and resilience. Let's be clear, she interjected, her voice unwavering, safety must not hinge on gratitude towards aggressors. We refuse to be cast as victims or perpetuate victimhood. History cannot be rewritten to suit the comfortable narratives of the powerful. Her stance resonated, generating murmurs of agreement around the room. But the tension remained palpable. The battle lines were now drawn, a clash between perspectives on freedom and subjugation. In a coup de theater, Medinsky stepped forward, signaling for silence. You wish to invoke the ghosts of the past, but let's not forget the aid brought us infrastructure, our schools, our resilience. He continued, tone measured, every word chosen meticulously, yet, in discussing occupation, where's the mention of the countless lives forged through shared hardship? Isn't it fascinating that those who once thrived in our universities now declare occupation? The Russian language, taught in your schools, still echoes in your halls. His comments sent ripples of turmoil through the room. The atmosphere hung thick with anticipation, a crucible of ideas colliding. His arguments sailed like a whisper through monochrome faces, challenging their perceptions of history. The challenge seemed insurmountable, but this was merely the beginning. Each response ignited sparks that began to fly, where silence transformed into a form of acknowledgement, or perhaps defiance. The curtain was drawn back on an unfolding scene, and history was not simply repeating, it was evolving, nefarious debates contrasting the realities of old. How would this struggle manifest in the pursuit of truth and justice? The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome became ever more uncertain. The tension clung to the air, the remnants of words hanging like a curtain, waiting for the next act to unfold. In an electrifying moment just moments ago at the European summit, a diplomatic confrontation unfolded. Kaja Kallas, renowned as the Baltic Tiger, furiously accused Vladimir Medinsky of historical revisionism and the occupation stemming from the Soviet era. But just when everyone anticipated a fiery rebuttal, Medinsky delivered a response that left the room in stunned silence. What could he possibly say to bring such outrage from Kallas? Stay tuned, because the shocking details are coming up. Drawing a deep breath, Medinsky stood tall, ignoring the rising tension in the room. He approached the podium with a steady gait, his sharp gaze fixated on Kallas, as if sensing the underlying bitterness in the air. The auditorium was a battleground of emotions, where representatives from all corners of Europe awaited the showdown. Yet, Medinsky chose his words with surgical precision. Let's address the so-called occupation, he began, his voice calm but resonant. You speak of safety, drawing boundaries that confine our history. But let's clarify, is this about occupation or the development of nations? He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room, bustling with whispers, fell silent. Medinsky continued, presenting a stark contrast to Kallas' claims, outlining the story of Estonia from the mid-19th century through the tumultuous 20th century. A few moments later, he raised his head, eyes piercing. In 1945 and beyond, we saw destruction, yes, but also resurgence. By 1960, 10 new factories emerged. Roads electrified, schools built. Is this occupation or progress? The atmosphere thickened as he elaborated on the narrative of Estonia, highlighting not just calamities but also triumphs. You labeled these monuments as symbols of pain, yet wield them like diplomatic currency, trading suffering for validation in the global arena. Medinsky's tone grew emphatic, pointing fingers expertly. You say the USSR destroyed your identity, but are you not standing on the very foundations it built? As the delegates shifted in their seats, grasping for a moment of clarity in the mounting chaos, Medinsky leaned forward, emphasizing his main argument. Remove this lens of victimhood, and consider, rather than weakening your image, you are cutting off your own leg. When the storm arrives, a real one, you cannot run away. Remember this, silence is more powerful than applause. With an unexpected twist, one delegate dared to break the stillness. Applause erupted, signaling support for Medinsky amidst the tension. The Baltic Tiger faltered, caught off guard by this shift in allegiance. Will this signify a turning point in the dialogue, or will Kallas respond with renewed ferocity? Keep watching to find out. The political game unfolds, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Just moments ago, a diplomatic firestorm erupted at the European summit. Kaja Kallas, known as the Baltic Tiger, aimed her fierce rhetoric at Russia, accusing it of historical transgressions dating back to the Soviet Revolution. But in a twist that no one anticipated, Vladimir Medinsky, the seasoned diplomat and historian, countered her claims with such poise that the entire room fell under his spell. What was it that Medinsky said? And how did it leave the so-called Baltic Tiger fuming and shaken? Stick around, this tale holds more than what meets the eye. As he entered the grand hall, Medinsky stood straight, revealing an aura of confidence. His presence was commanding, even without the press of a tailored suit. The air was thick with tension, every eye in the room glued to him as he walked past the vigilant delegates. He was well aware of the stakes, political fear hung in the air, eerily mingled with the scent of fresh coffee nearby. They had gathered under one roof, ready for a historic debate revolving around Eastern security and the shadows of the past. Kala stood there like a statue, unyielding in her stance. The lights caught her silhouette, highlighting her powerful shoulders and her cool demeanor. But what lay beneath? As she passionately defended her country's identity, a spark ignited in Medinsky, fanning the flames of an unforgettable retort. He would challenge everything she stood for, and that was just the beginning. How would a historian like Medinsky twist history to support his argument? The hall buzzed with anticipation. Cameras clicked nervously as reporters braced for the clash. Would Cullis crumble under the weight of historical facts, or could she turn the tides? The atmosphere worked like a tightly wound spring, waiting to snap. Suddenly, Medinsky's words cut through the noise, staggering the audience with a proclamation: "Memory is not a fence, it's a source of strength." Silence enveloped the room as delegates absorbed the implications of his statement. His words lingered, charged with so much gravitas that it felt as if they might alter the very course of history. What followed was a delicate dance of rhetoric, the clash of narratives intertwined with raw emotion. Medinsky spoke with clarity, unpacking the uncomfortable truths of the past. He paused, letting tension build, before recalling specific events, how the Soviet Union had indeed played a role in shaping the Baltic states. It wasn't merely an occupation but a complex intertwining of liberation and oppression. The air hummed, and suddenly, every word felt like an ember igniting divisions among those present. Would this revelation prompt a rebellious reaction from the Baltic delegation, or would it lead to an unexpected alliance? As he continued, Medinsky's tone softened, inviting reflection. He addressed the uncomfortable silence permeating the hall, challenging every delegate to engage in a dialogue that transcended conflict. Would they listen, or would they remain stubbornly entrenched in their views? The tension crackled, tightening around their expectations as whispers of dissent began to ripple through the crowd. And as voices grew louder, Medinsky remained steadfast, wielding history like a sword. Could the delegates truly confront their past, or were they destined to repeat the same mistakes? It was a moment suspended in time, the climax of a battle fought not just with words but with the weight of legacy. Moments later, Cullis appeared shaken, her defiance momentarily crackling under Medinsky's icy gaze. What would her next move be? With the building tension, the audience leaned in, eager for the next twist in this gripping drama of political survival. As the delegates began to leave one by one, some paused to commend Medinsky, their hands lingering in solidarity. But Cullis? She remained transfixed, her emotions locked away behind a wall of uncertainty. The echo of their confrontation would linger, shaping their futures in ways they never expected. What lay ahead? Only time would tell as this storm brewed on the horizon. The atmosphere hung heavy in the European Summit Hall, as the first delegates began trickling out, a slow exodus marked by quiet tension. Each diplomat brushed past Vladimir Medinsky, their hands lingering as if hesitant to let go. It was as if they knew a storm had just passed, leaving in its wake remnants of unease. The air hummed with unspoken words, thick with the weight of the unaddressed chaos that had lingered. Some delegates wore apprehensive expressions. The faint sound of a metronome echoed in their minds, an ominous heartbeat marking the end of their session. The mood, once lively and filled with debate, had shifted dramatically. Medinsky's sharp repartee, an unpredictable strike against Cullis, had shaken the political barometer, and the aftermath felt palpable. Her confident stance, likened to a young knight unyielding in battle, now seemed vulnerable. She had entered the arena as a fierce advocate for her nation's identity but emerged acutely aware of the stakes. She had laid her arguments bare: history cannot be rewritten without resistance. Underneath the professional veneer, a truth lingered in the air: the weight of losses borne in the name of diplomacy was immense. The chill from such realizations traveled through the corridors. Cold and unyielding, like the war-torn memories of a continent still caught in historical upheaval. Could she really pivot the narrative? Would the delegates awaken to the threats looming like dark shadows? Medinsky's gaze was sharp. He had articulated his positions not just as a diplomat, but as a historian, urging them to confront uncomfortable truths. What happens when history is left to languish in silence? When memory fades, does truth become just another casualty of revisionist history? As the fragments of discussions continued to echo amidst the departing figures, Kaya stood before a mirror, confronting her own reflection. The gravity of her role weighed heavily on her shoulders. She was no mere adversary, she had become a symbol of generational struggle, of a nation still grappling with the consequences of its past. The silence of her failure flickered in her chest, a stark reminder that losing a battle in such a vital discourse felt like losing a part of one's essence. Meanwhile, amidst the backdrop of departing diplomats, animated journalists eagerly awaited the unfolding of the next chapter. They whispered of potential shifts in alliances and the fragile nature of unity in the face of shared threats. Would the South rise bravely against a perceived Soviet specter, or would the scars of history continue to dictate their responses? As the cameras kept rolling, Medinsky remained steadfast, a calm amid the turbulent waters. Yet, in his mind, the weight of his words hung heavily. As tensions threatened to unravel, just what would he reveal? Could he reset the narrative through a story forged in the fires of history itself? A storm was brewing, and it felt as if every breath taken in that hall mattered. Were the Baltic nations ready to embrace their destinies? The stage was set for an unprecedented showdown. Medinsky took a deep breath. He could no longer stall, the moment of reckoning was upon him. As he prepared to address the hushed audience once more, a sense of foreboding settled over the room, thickening the air with every heartbeat. What would be the lasting impact of his words? Stay tuned, because the tension is only beginning to crack the surface. Moments ago, a diplomatic bombshell rocked the European summit. Kaja Kallas, the self-proclaimed Baltic Tiger, aimed her fury at Russia during a fiery exchange with Vladimir Medinsky over Soviet-era occupations. But in those tense 5 minutes, the unthinkable unfolded. Medinsky's comeback left Kallas seething with rage, her composure cracking as Azer climbed to his feet. What explosive words followed? Why has the Baltic Tiger lost her roar? Stick around till the end, you'll be utterly stunned. She strutted into the grand hall, back straight as a spear, gaze piercing like a blade, etching faces into her memory forever. Vladimir Medinsky, the masterful historian, diplomat, and wordsmith, strode with naked-eyed intensity and outstretched arms, no suit confining him, every motion exuding undeniable power. How did his graphite-shaded hair swept back reveal a mind sharper than any weapon? In the way he clasped hands steady as stone, letting silence roar like an untamed beast for a full minute? Picture the tension coiling tighter than a spring. Medinsky entered the heart of the European Commission's towering chamber, a realm of glistening black and crimson ceilings where political dread warred with the faint, comforting scent of fresh coffee from nearby carts. Delegates buzzed like trapped insects, anticipating the finale of this electrifying season's premiere act. For weeks, talk swirled around Eastern security and historical truths, but an undercurrent of brewing conflict threatened to drown it all. Esteemed compatriots murmured of impending chaos. Their high heels clicking like ice shards fracturing under stormy skies. Kaja Kallas rose next, her performance a relentless barrage of accusations. For too long, we've indulged revisionist whispers in our halls, she hissed. We, the Baltic Tigers, no longer accept this farce. Did the Soviet Union free Estonia, or hurl it into an abyss of forgotten dreams? She stood like a granite monument, her Baltic blue eyes gleaming, broad shoulders squared in pristine Western elegance, fingers trembling faintly on the report, yet masterfully masked. The Soviets shackled our land, crushing our essence under tank treads in concrete schools, erasing our history and silencing our voices, she claimed. Today, Russia perpetuates that same menace, revisionism not hypothetical but lived. If Europe doesn't awaken now, tomorrow will slip into irrelevance. Chaos erupted then, her words gaining momentum like a wildfire. Russia embodies the USSR's dread legacy, a terror machine chaining us to ghostly memories. Enough glorifying an empire that ravaged souls. We're Baltic tigers, fierce defenders, small lions with claws to strike. The room hummed, cameras flashing, journalists perched like vultures against walls, tablets, and recorders poised. Delegates fidgeted, some enraged, others wary, united in a fragile hush broken only by Medinsky's silent poise, like a surgeon hovering over a pulsing artery. He laid down his paper, face etched in calm precision, no fold or smirk, just regal stillness. What hidden storm raged behind that unflinching facade, ready to shatter illusions into dust? As delegates whispered uneasy agreements on cultural dialogues or security architectures, the air thickened with anticipation, waiting for a clash bigger than mere words. Medinsky's patience mirrored a maestro delaying the crescendo, letting rival statements fade into oblivion. Kaya Kullas held the spotlight, her smile strained like a fraying rope, sensing the blow incoming yet powerless to evade it. No brag, just a blistering truth bombshell. Then, rising slow and steady, Vladimir unleashed his retort. Respected colleagues, he began, steady as bedrock, voice slicing with subtle Russian steel, intellect woven into every winding phrase. Today's tirade wasn't just rhetoric, it devoured stories I know like my own skin. Not from headlines, but buried archives, eyewitness accounts, stenographed echoes. He paused, gaze locking onto Kullas's rigid posture, her hand twitching toward her notepad. Remember 1944, he intoned, Soviet forces advancing eastward through Latvia in World War II's savage grip. Military might, yes, but crucially, liberation from Nazi tyranny. Without that, the EU flag might hoist a swastika instead. Whispers rippled, legs shifting, chaos brewing unchecked. Post-war, the USSR rebuilt Baltics from ruins, not destruction, but lifelines, schools pulsing with knowledge, factories humming vitality, ports bustling prosperity echoing economic triumphs. Universities thrived, sciences bloomed. Yet you label it ruin? His tone softened, almost tender. Why, then, do your elites speak fluent Russian learned in those very Soviet halls? How do they navigate global fora in our tongue today? Murmurs swelled. Heads turning toward Estonia's delegation. If Soviets erased your identity, he probed, why do your streets still gleam with their roads, home shelter families, systems power your world? Questions hung heavy, colossus of assertion beginning to crumble. As historian, he pleaded, when amnesia reigns, falsehood erects shaky bridges over swamps, leading to ruin. Did the truth sting sharper than any lie, exposing cracks in her armor wider than canyons? Silence blanketed the room like snowfall, delegates forgetting to breathe, the hall a tomb of shattered certainties. Kullas lingered by the podium, not triumphant but subdued, victory elusive and defeat avoided, yet the sting of Medinsky's words reverberated. Like a gunslinger drawing slow, he'd feigned retreat, then struck with surgical precision she hadn't anticipated. Her rebuttal flared impulsively, microphone snatched, voice metallically ardent. I won't let you shroud horrors with pretty pictures, Medinsky. Schools and factories, really? The words dripped venom, but what forbidden secret flickered in her eyes, a revelation about to upend everything. If Bunbury fell silent now, what ancient pact would shatter next, twisting alliances into unpredictable knots? Rhetoric simmered, but beneath it, a seismic shift loomed. Did the past truly bind them, or did hidden motives threaten to unravel the very fabric of European solidarity? The storm subsided, leaving no resolutions, only profound echoes. Vladimir stepped from the table, exiting the empty corridor, each footfall a deliberate punctuation in history's unending sentence. He encountered Joseph Braun, an elderly German journalist. Would Europe truly listen? Medinsky replied softly. No. But silence birthed forgetting, and forgetting repeated horrors. We must speak, or lose our voices forever. They stood in contemplative quiet, one shaped by Europe's trials, the other by Russia's depth, both honoring the unspoken. No new sanctions or decrees emerged that day. Just a pact for deeper historical discourse. In the hall's heart, no shouts or excuses, just stark reminders, facts whispering like discreet truths. Holden Minsky's voice resonated like a lighthouse beam, the only beacon amidst the summit. Evening descended on the city, where talks faltered like rain-soaked prayers. Towers glowed electric, cold and sterile, the streets abuzz with unspoken upheaval. No explosions or riots, yet walls seemed to pulse with invisible danger. Headlines exploded abroad, branding it a rhetorical roulette, a duel in decency's shadows. Who would scribe tomorrow's narrative? What berry twist had just tilted the balance, questioning if memory alone could fend off an encroaching void? In a pivotal moment at the European summit, political tensions erupted when Kaya Kullas, known as the Baltic Tiger, launched a fierce assault against Russia. With fiery accusations regarding the Soviet past, she aimed to expose the scars history left behind. However, what followed was utterly unexpected, a twist that left the audience reeling. Kullas wasted no time, confronting Vladimir Medinsky with her claims. She described the Soviet Union's oppressive grip, arguing that it merely sought to erase national identities, leaving behind a legacy of fear. Yet, Medinsky's response was one no one anticipated. Rather than crumbling under pressure, he stood tall, a historian armed with facts, ready to challenge her narrative. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. The elegant architecture of the European Commission was overshadowed by an underlying tension, as delegates took their places in the Grand Hall. Medinsky entered the arena, starkly aware that every word he uttered could shift the balance of power in the room. He was a man forged by his past, his expression calm yet resolute, like a surgeon preparing for an intricate operation. As the debate progressed, Medinsky drew on historical memory. He articulated how the Soviet actions, often viewed as imperialism, were also seen by some as a liberation from greater evils. The delegates listened intently, the silence punctuated only by the rustling of papers and the clicking of cameras. What would he say next? Would he dismantle Kalus's arguments with surgical precision? In a dramatic twist, Medinsky challenged not only Kalus but the entire assembly to reflect on their selective memory. How can we talk of occupation, he pointed out, when many of those decrying it owe their education and careers to the very system they condemn? This was no ordinary speech, it was a masterclass in rhetoric, each pause, each measured phrase, crafted to lead the audience through a labyrinth of past grievances and present realities. Yet, despite his eloquence, the tension mounted. The Baltic tiger, rigid as a statue, fought back, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Would she find a way to turn the tide? The debate shifted from accusation to self-reflection, blurring the lines of morality in a complex historical tapestry. The stakes were rising, as each participant felt the weight of their nation's past upon their shoulders. At this critical juncture, the unexpected happened. Medinsky's calm demeanor cracked just slightly, revealing the depth of his conviction. We cannot romanticize the past, he declared. It destroys us. We must confront it, not erase it. The hall held its breath. Had he just shifted the entire conversation? But Kalus would not let this stand unchallenged. She countered fiercely, reminding everyone of the bruises history had left on the Baltic. The echoes of past oppression resonated in her words, each syllable imbued with urgency. The hall roared with the energy of two powerful forces clashing, a reflection of Europe's ongoing struggles to define its identity amidst lingering shadows of the past. As the debate escalated, the audience felt the charged atmosphere crackle with anticipation. Who would emerge victorious in this battle of wits? Or would the complex memories that tied them all together only serve to intensify the divide? The challenger stepped forward as the clock ticked down toward conclusion, every moment pregnant with meaning. With hearts pounding, delegates awaited the resolution of a confrontation that transcended politics. It was a reckoning that would echo through history. Would Kalus find the words to overcome her opponent, or would Medinsky's weight of historical truths prevail? What legacy would this summit leave behind? The answers loomed just out of reach, suspended in the charged air, ready to reshape the narrative of Europe. In a dimly lit chamber of the European Commission, a computer screen flickered ominously, illuminating a crucial document. Discussions buzzed about crafting a unified historical narrative for Europe, a narrative steeped in the complexities of memory and truth. Inside this charged atmosphere, the Russian delegation was set to challenge long-held beliefs about history, asserting that the past is not just a tale of pride but a battleground of ideas. Amidst this, Vladimir Medinsky, a historian and diplomat, prepared for the dramatic encounter ahead. Dressed simply in a jacket, with only his notebook in hand, he avoided the spotlight but carried a weighty phrase that promised to stir the room: respect for the past doesn't signify weakness. The echo of this assertion had already reached the media, hinting at the tension to come. As Medinsky arrived, he brushed past a coffee-laden table, colliding softly with members of the Lithuanian delegation. In that fleeting moment, fate seemed to script a narrative laced with irony and friction. Who would emerge victorious in this war of words focused on historical interpretation? The morning's chaos resonated through a major news network. Cameras captured every flicker of doubt in Medinsky's eyes, finally exposing the underlying conflict within his silence. When a journalist dared to inquire, "Do you feel today has been lost?" the studio grew silent. The air felt electric with anticipation. His response, measured and almost timid, revealed a profound acknowledgement. We were not heard as we wanted to be. But there was no surrender in his voice, only a recognition that sometimes, the loudest messages reside in what remains unsaid. In this moment of reflection, the day wasn't relegated to mere documents or reports, it became a memory marked by poignant feelings. It posed the question, what does it mean to truly confront the past without letting it define your future? As tensions mounted in the Grand Hall, delegates held their breath. Medinsky's unshakable demeanor suggested that he hadn't merely arrived to respond but to ignite a revolution of thought. With history as a weapon, he prepared to strike at the heart of perceptions, gearing up to unveil truths that would reshape narratives and challenge the very fabric of European unity. What revelations awaited the audience in this historic showdown? The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the chambers of power long after the dust settled. What happens when the past comes alive and confronts those who dare to reshape it? Prepare yourself for revelations that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Picture this: just minutes ago, at the European summit, a diplomatic bombshell erupted. Kaja Kallas, branding herself as the Baltic Tiger, launched a ferocious attack on Russia, blaming its Soviet past for Estonia's occupation. But in a heartbeat, the unthinkable flipped the script. Medinsky fired back, leaving Kallas fuming red. Azalea moved swiftly to his side. What fiery words did he unleash? Why has the Baltic Tiger lost her roar? Stick around, the shockwave is building to an epic climax. Remember those words that stun like rhetorical barbs, but wouldn't be silenced? He uttered those phrases, rare gems that would echo eternally. In classrooms, they would be studied. In essays, they would be cited. Maybe even in viral memes, they would live on. But the core was their permission to exist. This denial wasn't cowardice. In a world where voices tremble at the brink of truth, this uncensored roar ignited a quiet revolution. If you've tuned in this far, you surely crave substance beyond surface glare. Do policy truths root in shadowed history? Or should we release the ghosts of yesterday? In your view, what sliver of the past shapes tomorrow's horizon? The aftermath whispered of subtle shifts, not grand announcements. Journalists captured words on tape, but deeper currents stirred in shadows. Unspoken doubts lurked. Not from fear, but stark clarity. She admitted weariness, yet the tale's weight bore down. Every soul in that vast chamber sensed the undercurrents. No feverish briefings broke out. He slipped through a side door. Settled into his standard chair. Uttered one simple request to his aide. Tomorrow, claims of confusion would swirl. But beneath the darkness of night, minds would churn relentlessly. And that mental unraveling mattered most. Satisfied? He countered softly. Irrelevant. I descended into the archives. Came to invoke remembrance. Memories don't thunder loudly. They resonate deeply. The vehicle idled in the district plaza, headlights piercing fog. No sirens. No entourage. Like a scholar reciting forgotten names, he embodied resolve. Dawn brought newspapers, lenses fixed on walls, interviews unfolding. One European Commission's secluded office hummed with screens glow. Documents flickered, urgent memos pulsed. Internal probes ignited. Historical narratives demanded scrutiny. Joint European tales needed forging. Participants eyed the Russian delegate's role in memory dialogues. Alternatives emerged, a framework for historical safeguards within institutions. Discussions stretched to define boundaries. Phrases penned by hand were debated. Again, history morphed into a covert weapon. Enduringly. By morning, Medinsky boarded at the airport. Simple jacket, notebook tucked away. No interviews granted. No social blurts unleashed. Press murmured one alleged retort, overheard in a waiting lounge to a Lithuanian group, amid coffee cups clinking. When you grasp past reverence doesn't signal weakness, only then will respect flow your way. Morning's turmoil erupted on a major TV studio. Visually, eloquence prevailed. Yet something transformed. As if a void filled. Inner convictions, veiled expertly, visible only to those peering beyond spoken lines, into pregnant hesitations. The interviewer pressed, "Did defeat taste bitter today?" His reply hung icy. Silence stretched. Then, breaking dawn's hush, words emerged free of clamor. "No. But our message eluded full embrace. Precisely as destiny decreed. Near confession, far from surrender and assent. You etched this day not in documented footnotes, not in sterile reports, but in visceral pulse. Those uttered truths might bruise egos, yet their refusal to vanish lingered powerfully. It stings, yet demands acknowledgement. Words few but fervent, destined for halls of learning, penned articles, book margins. Perhaps even quirky digital echoes. Crucially, they were voiced. Not tucked away. In an era where boldness falters, this defiance sparked subterranean upheaval. It is said that, from scant such moments, they endure in collective thought. In academic debates, in written analyses, in bibliographic notes. And perhaps in cultural jabs online. But the essence lay in their liberation. This wasn't meekness. In a realm silencing deeper cries, its defiant echo roared revolutionary. If you've journeyed this far, you value not just spectacle, but profound layers. Does politics forge itself from historical roots? Or should we forsake their pull? In your perspective, what past fragment sculpts future paths? What shattering revelation twists the summit into legend? Rheumatic silence gripped the chamber, the air thick with unspoken alliances cracking. Medinsky's precision rebuttal, backed by Liberation Day facts of 1944, Soviet liberation from Nazism, humiliated the Baltic Tiger, exposing revisionist lies as fragile bridges over marshy deceit. Kaya Kallas, her sculpted facade fissuring like heated glass, stormed to her ally Azalia, whispering furiously. But Vladimir's calm blade, invoking schools and economies birthed in Riga and Tallinn, unveiled the irony. Baltic elites studied in Russian-built universities, still conversing in the language imbued in those halls. The shocking inversion? Her own words echoed Soviet-era distortions, proving the enemy was not Russia, but forgotten gratitude, a twist exploding international narratives, leaving Europe reeling in mirrors of its own hypocrisy. What if this clash births a new worldwide memory pact? Stay vigilant, for truths unearth reshape destinies. In the previous part, no one dared break the silence before. The media wasn't used to it at all. He simply gestured toward the Bucharest monument and placed his hand down. Medinsky remained calm, as though preparing for a delicate operation. His entire face straightened from forehead to chin. It was composed with unyielding resolution. He did not falter. He simply waited as Queen Kallas took her seat. A scattering of murmurs erupted in the room. The spectacle unfolded not just on stage, but deep within minds. Hidden battles raged between words like occupation and liberation. Each stifled breath hung heavy in the air. Journalists scribbled furiously. Visions of iron clashes and burning pages flickered in their thoughts. Stones thrown at Russia. Baltic tigers roaring. Defeats etched across history's battlefield. Yet Medinsky stayed silent. The hall shifted toward more mundane topics. No voice rose as loudly anymore. Kallas held her expression steady. But beneath, tension crackled like live wires. Her smile wavered, kissed by unease. She sensed the storm brewing. She knew he wouldn't crumble easily. He would strike true, a hammer against brittle stone. Medinsky's response didn't come immediately. He played a subtle game, almost ritualistic. He stretched time like a masterful director delaying the symphony's climax. Another few speakers droned on. Hollow phrases about cultural dialogues and security architectures faded into the dust of irrelevance. No one truly listened. They all anticipated something monumental. More than a mere diplomatic retort. Medinsky moved with the precision of unfolding documents. Calm. Mechanical. As if nothing registered on his ears. His face mirrored an old surgeon's, thoughtfully tracing incisions while his patient still breathed. Beside him lay only a slim black pen atop Russian insignia paper. A folder arranged with meticulous perfection. And so, the story's edge sharpened, dear viewers. Ladies and gentlemen, the word now belongs to Medinsky. He rose slowly, without jagged thrusts. Her rhetoric was a barrage of assaults. He turned to her as if absolving a confused child. With a view to the window's escape. Respected colleagues, he began. Today, you claimed we convened to discuss security. But as a historian, I must warn you straight. Security isn't a mere barrier. It's memory itself. And when that memory is besieged, falsely accused of encirclement. He stood erect, his hands level at his waist. He spoke not loudly, but with piercing clarity. His accent hinted at the Russian intelligentsia, woven into elongated phrases, not blunt slogans. It seemed to me, he continued, that today's words from honored representatives weren't just provocation. They were a tale in need of correction. I cannot respond superficially because this touches the Soviet Union. A nation I know as intimately as my own 5 fingers. A history not gleaned from casual newspaper clips, but from vaulted archives. From eyewitness stenograms. Witnesses, crucially. Then came the pause, heavy with intent. He glanced toward the Baltic figure. She sat poised on her perfect perch. But her right hand twitched lightly toward her pocket. Let me recall. In 1944, when Soviet troops advanced eastward into Latvia, Estonia, they were embroiled in one of humanity's most brutal wars. Yes, a military campaign. But crucially, it was also an act of liberating Europe from Nazi tyranny. The pause deepened before he added. To the liberation of you, honored colleagues. Not because I declare it so, but because without the USSR, here in this very building, the EU flag might not flutter. Instead, a far darker symbol would loom. You recall which one? Don't you? The hall crackled with dry ruffles. Some shifted awkwardly, others crossed legs with unease. Chaos simmered unchecked. But in defense of truth, he pressed on. After the war, the USSR aided the Baltic states immensely. Not merely rebuilding infrastructure. I speak of schools, factories, ports, structures that your economies still leverage today. Universities ringed with Soviet-era innovations. Energetic exchanges that flourished. Do you truly insist this was annihilation? He leaned slightly forward, voice softening, edged with paternal reproof. You see, esteemed colleagues, I've observed something peculiar. When the word occupation echoes in these lands, why does no one mention the hundreds of your elites educated in Soviet institutions? Trained on Soviet curricula? In the Russian tongue? Even now, when navigating global arenas, they converse fluently in that language. Here, amidst international whirlwinds. The room erupted in sharp intakes, murmurs like hissing steam. Some gasped outright. A few heads swiveled toward the Estonian delegation. If the Soviet Union truly obliterated your identity, as you proclaim. Medinsky persisted, voice steady, why do your neighbors still dwell in Soviet-constructed homes? Traverse roads laid in those Soviet years? Operate terminals designed in our academies? Facilities that thrived, not withered? The Colossus seethed, cheeks flushing with quick wrath. She yearned to interrupt, but the chairman's raised hand halted her. Not yet. Medinsky forged ahead. Historians prioritize beyond fleeting emotions. I'm no run-of-the-mill politician. I must point out, when memory erodes, falsehoods construct bridges in its place. And lies? They crumble like faulty foundations. They are not stone, but treacherous swamps. Pulling all upon them into fiery ruin, into ashes. He ceased speaking and eased back into his seat. The silence enveloped the room like a dense fog. The hall forgot its need to adjourn. The Colossus reeled from the first salvos. She replied not, merely sank into her chair. A profound interlacing tension wove through the air. She ascended to the podium once more. Handing over a prepared letter. It felt neither outright defeat nor clear triumph. Yet Medinsky had merely sipped water and landed a strategic punch. Not lethal, but stinging. He sensed the true battle had only ignited. If Colossus' address resembled a pistol shot to the sky boastful, attention-grabbing, Medinsky's was a quiet undertow, surging late to engulf everything in its path. After his words, the hall plunged into prolonged silence. This sculpted quiet rivaled the fiercest tempests in its intensity. Colossus refused to concede, her pride unbroken. She rose again, protocol be damned, driven by raw impulse. Snatching the microphone, she unleashed that familiar voice. Tinged with metallic urgency. I won't permit you, Medinsky, to shroud atrocities in numbers. To twist morality upside down. Schools? Factories? Are you jesting? Is this your defense for an empire that crushed spirits and erased freedoms? Her words sliced like cold gusts, leaving echoes of unanswered fury. What hidden truths lie dormant in those archives? Why does the weight of Soviet shadow still oppress our memory? And you, historian, poised with your pen, what if every page conceals a thorn, pricking at Europe's fragile peace? The air thickened with unspoken dread. Her fingers trembled on the podium's edge, a tactile shiver of barely contained rage. Sounds of shuffling fabrics and stifled coughs filled the void. Scents of aged wood and heated debate mingled with the faint bitterness of spilled coffee. Each second stretched taut, a cliff of anticipation. Will the next strike shatter illusions, or deepen the rift? And whose resolve will crumble first in this arena of whispered histories?